to break value engineering down into largely three areas. You've got specification, you've got functionality, and then ultimately you've got scope reduction. And they all operate at different phases of the pricing process when you're going through it with the client. So product and specification value engineering is making sure that you are matching the product to the client's needs. You're not exceeding the brief, but you're not underselling the brief. For example, if you need freezer operating at -20, typically the right thickness of panel will be 125 mil to give you the thermal performance to maintain that temperature in a reasonably economic manner. So there's no point offering the client a 220 mil panel because it's overkill for their needs. Yeah, and it's also more expensive. We like to do client visits wherever possible and see the client sites before we price for a project, and it's really important for us in terms of understanding the functionality of the space, understanding how the client's going to interact in that environment, how they're going to store their goods, how they're going to move around that space. And it's often a good opportunity for us to present alternative ideas, changes to the layout, which we feel would be, in some cases, a lot more cost efficient and eliminate dead space or wastage. It's about understanding the client environment. It's about looking at what they're going to use and what they do and don't need. And quite often there's a sort of a huge gulf of difference between what's drawn on paper, but when you go and interact three-dimensionally with the space, it opens up other options. Scope reduction is the type of value engineering that happens right at the end of the process. So the client's called you in to price their proposed project, you put the numbers together and you find out that it exceeds their current budget. It's then about working with the client to understand work that can be done now, perhaps work that can be done later or in a different phase or after they've raised funds. So they can still deliver the project they need to meet their immediate requirements, but don't end up in a position where they are double spending money at a later date. So we recently did a project down in Bodmin for Proper Cornish, a purveyor of savoury goods. So they've got an existing factory facility there that was built a number of years ago, and when they did the original fit out, they left a couple of areas which were originally planned for not done. And as the business needs have increased, there's been a requirement to fit out those sort of leftover areas. So we were called in to look at a freezer project because they needed additional frozen capacity and fill out an existing area of the factory footprint. This was quoted, originally designed, and we were sent the original design and did a site visit to have a look at the site for ourselves. So the value engineering for us became apparent at the site visit stage. So you've got an almost triangular shaped wedge room. It's in a sort of traditional portal frame steel building. So you've got an exterior wall, a number of huge 500 by 500 mil steel poles. And on the original plans, the wall was to sort of stagger around those columns, which is quite a cost inefficient thing to do. It's much more cost efficient to build a straight line than it is to build a staggered wall. So in talking to the client to understand what they were going to store there, ultimately what they were going to store there was standard size pallets, 1.2 meters by 1 meter. The additional space they would gain by staggering the wall around the columns isn't big enough to put a pallet in. It isn't big enough to actually increase the storage for the goods that they were putting in that freezer. So we recommended running the wall straight across the face of the columns. In principle, they lose a tiny amount of floor space, but in reality, it's floor space that can't be used for the product that's going to go in there. So doing this kind of configuration change is basically of a zero impact to the client. It doesn't reduce the functional space that they're going to need, but it saves them a fair chunk of change on all the additional labour and materials that goes into staggering around there. And again, it's a degree of future-proofing. They're always going to use this freezer for large-scale pallets. If they were stacking, small individual boxes in there, then that would be valuable extra space, but that's not how their business performs. So it is literally a waste of time and money. I definitely look at that as functionality. It's understanding the way that the client's going to use and interact with the environment and making a sensible suggestion to save them overall on the project.